Then you'll have a bunch of questions, so that's nice. And I can, Shishma, I can see some guitar behind you. You're also interested in music therapy.
Yes, I'm interested in guitar and I'm trying to find out time to learn it sometime. I'm just a
Hmm.
beginner.
Okay, yeah. Have you done some work with people using music, Kevin?
No, sir, not really. But I've taught beatboxing. I involve a lot in beatboxing and finger drumming. So I'm looking at research also to use beatboxing as a as an instrument for speech sound disorders or anything with music
That's a
therapy.
great tool. It's an excellent thing that you can do. Actually, like in music therapy, right? Voice is one, especially when you're working in mental health and say, for example, in special needs.
Mm.
Uh, Using your voice can be very, very effective because that's your
Yeah,
primary form of expression, right? So then, and if you think about, a lot of people get lost in that area because um, I think when they think of voice, they immediately go into singing, which is
yeah,
okay. I
yeah,
mean, using your voice to sing is all right, but if you spend time with children with special needs, you'll notice that they are not really so keen on always learning something functional as such, and
yeah,
they
yeah, yeah.
already have these sounds that they make. A lot of them have very unique sounds that they play around with.
Yeah, yeah.
They might pick up a sound and then they'll keep playing it over and over again. So I can only imagine the amount of things you can do with beatboxing because that sound will get their attention, and then they'll,
Yeah.
like you can use that to your advantage in so many ways.
It'll be like a fun approach to learn, and then automatically those sounds will tend to come in. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And if you, like I was saying, a lot of people with autism, for example, have a lot of sounds that they themselves are, creating and playing around with,
right.
like tiny, tiny sounds that they pick up from here and there, and um, can be very interesting. It's a good area because also, if you think of speech, a lot of
Yeah.
speech is kind of based in making sounds. So if you want to improve those skills, also you can, it's a good idea.
Thank you, sir.
All right, we will be beginning in a few minutes.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool. So shall I start then?
1 minute, sir.
Yeah, let me know.
Yeah. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We welcome you all this afternoon to the Music and Mental Health webinar. The Western Music Association and Sumana, the Psychology Association from St. Joseph's, have collaborated to bring to you Music and Mental Health webinar. This is facilitated so that we understand music and psychology in all its dimensions. Before we begin, just a few general instructions. Since you all are watching it live on YouTube, I request you all to use the live chat option on YouTube to post all your questions. I repeat, please use the chat option on YouTube to post all your questions. We're very excited to have Mr. Kamal Singh. He is
Something happened.
I think our network glitched a little bit.
and secure space for change and growth, activity, and above all, through musical improvisation. A warm welcome to you, sir. We're so glad to have you with us.
Hi, thank you. Um, okay, so let me just jump straight into it. Let me kind of briefly tell you. I'm not sure whether the connection is like kind of everything's okay, Kevin.
Yes, yes, sir. You can
Okay,
start off.
all right. So yeah, let me tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'm going to jump straight into like what I think I can start the discussion around. And I'd like this to be a discussion or interactive one. So maybe the moment you start having questions, feel free to ask them, and like maybe that's the best way to go forward in having a discussion as opposed to me just going on blabbering. So. um, just a little bit of background about myself and what I've been doing. I started out, well, I've always been interested in music and some kind of humanitarian work related to music, right? So I heard about music therapy maybe around 2002 or 3 or somewhere around that time. That's the first time I heard about it. But it was fairly new that time, and the only options of kind of studying or even getting to understand the subject more would be to be abroad or to like go to some university abroad and study, and that was not possible. So I kind of waited around doing my own research and like trying to find out what it is. In the meantime, I think I was involved in many music based uh, social things, and like just trying to figure out how music can be used in various ways. I also worked in a church leading worship, and that's another aspect of music which is also kind of very interesting, how music relates to the spiritual journey. And any kind of spirituality does have a lot of music around it, so that connection between spiritualism and music is also another interesting space. Yeah, then I think around 2011 or 12 is when I heard about this center in Delhi called the Music Therapy Trust. And they kind of started teaching music therapy. It was like a part time course and a full time course. But again, going to Delhi was out of the question. But eventually, I made the choice and I went to Delhi and then I studied music therapy. In that process of studying music therapy, I think it started off kind of a little confusing for me because I think traditionally music therapy is also based in the traditional ideas of psychotherapy and what we understand as like the traditional forms of very professional formal kinds of structures, right? Also, I noticed that it was very uh, kind of therapist works with client, kind of this therapist being in the superior role. That ideology didn't really work well with me, but that was luckily just the first 3 months. And then eventually, as the course evolved and other people came in to teach, I kind of figured out the whole community aspect of it, which is a lot more interactive again. So it's empowerment based, and there is no in charge or like there is no hierarchy in that. It's more like you're playing together, and in the process of playing music or experiencing music or listening to music, there is some there are other things happening there, and then as a therapist you kind of facilitate that process depending on what your clients want or what you're looking for achieving, if it's a community project or whether it's an individual something individual. I hope I'm making sense so far. If anybody has any questions you can always stop, but it's kind of I'm just narrating incidents right now. Yeah, so basically, this whole idea of empowerment and a community approach to music therapy, that was more resonating for me, in terms of also thinking about our country. And this hierarchy system of therapy was not really something I was keen on exploring, especially around with the stigma that you have around therapy. And then I think having some kind of structure of who is in charge and who is not in charge, I thought that might kind of create more division than anything else. Yeah, so in understanding this idea of which is like what my core framework is, it's this idea of community music therapy. Now, that does not mean you work with communities. It's an approach of music therapy which is based in various ideas, but it's kind of from the perspective of the person you're working with. So you don't go there with some uh, information or knowledge or superiority and go and dump it on somebody else. You use your experience and your worldview and your understanding of music, or your understanding of how music works in these environments or in these kind of scenarios. You have that knowledge, and then you go and you see how you can contribute or facilitate, as opposed to teaching or being the therapist, or you know what I mean. So it's more like it's more like an interactive process. And because it's based in music, it's improvised. So there's a lot of free playing, and that free playing is not based in the idea of music as we know it, in terms of formal music or in terms of music based on skill. Which reminds me of the most important part of music therapy. In music therapy, at least the way I work, or the form of music therapy that I kind of function from, music training and music skill is not required. It's for anyone. And actually, if you work with somebody who has music skill and music training and who is an accomplished musician or something like that, it actually creates more problems than anything else, because it's not based on music, and music can be a hindrance. Your knowledge of music can become a hindrance in your process of therapy, if that makes any sense, because you're kind of looking at music as a form of communication, as a form of expression, but not a musical expression, more like an emotional expression of who you are. So you're trying to get them to communicate and express using these sounds. Why do we do that? We do that because uh, using, okay, I think I'm kind of getting into the space I wanted to now. So yeah, so if you think about music and communication, communication in terms of expression, and also um, kind of a quest, right? Where you're trying to figure out something. Yeah, you have certain things to express, but you also want to figure out some things. So this is how music is kind of joining all these things together. So music or sound, let's call it sound for now. Okay. So if you think about communication, there are like, it's kind of based in language. The way we communicate right now is based in language, which means it's language. I don't mean that in terms of your regional language like Tamil or Kannada or English or whatever. That's okay, of course, that's also part of it. And again, words mean different things. So communication is difficult. And language already creates a lot of limitations and boundaries and definitions. But if we take it one step further and think about communication based in language and how it can become problematic or even like sometimes inadequate, is because language is also you're kind of exposed to language from a very early age. Like before you can even communicate or be part of communication, you're already exposed to language in terms of uh, let me try and make this a little clearer, because I'm kind of exploring some areas here which is not easy to describe, but I'm going to try my best. So there are definitions of yourself, right, which comes from understanding language, which means approval, disapproval, not just your Kannada and your Hindi and English and things like this, but the idea of approval, the idea of disapproval, the idea of being wanted, not being wanted, the idea of being loved, not loved, the idea of being worthless, or the idea of being celebrated, things like this. So this definition of yourself and who you think you are is kind of also based in the language around you. The way people are talking and expressing themselves and what you pick up as a child becomes your idea of who you are also, which includes this idea of wrong and right. Then and then in this language or in this communication that you're kind of taking on, you're kind of also getting limited to this identity that you're accepting of yourself, or what your understanding of yourself, or what you think is favorable about you with somebody else, or your parents or your caregivers, right? So then you kind of get into this space of limitations. Unknowingly, knowingly, it does not matter, but this language creates some kind of limitations for your own self. Um, Now, sometimes I think from this experience, all of us at some degree or the other will have certain emotional kind of emotional, how do we say this, like emotional experiences that we cling to or we kind of are stuck with, right, which show only in terms of in a situation where you're kind of helpless. So let's take for example this idea of a very common idea of not being good enough, or a very very common notion of ourselves, right, or not being good enough, or like uh, let's say not being liked, the fear of not being liked. Now this is coming from some kind of language. You understand what I mean by that? Like it's something coming from some form of language that you've understood about yourself. You are not actually somebody who doesn't have to be liked, or you're not worthless, or you're not good enough, but there is this thing that is troubling you. You are not sure about this, and that comes from the communication you've received, right? All these unsaid things or like certain experiences. So if you take, I'm just going really like specifically to this right now, right? So if you take that idea of not being good enough, and you think about it from a very logical space. You can be like, hey, that's not true. You're not good enough. You're good enough, and you are worth it. And everybody is special, and you are special too. And everybody is different, and So you know all this stuff too. But does it count? It does not count, because once you have these experiences in your subconscious mind, based on the language you've received, uh, it's very hard for logic to kick in over there. It's a way you think of yourself, and then that insecurity just keeps, like, it's there. Whether you like it or not, it's there. Why am I talking about this? Because there's a way of addressing that through music, or through another form of communication, which is music, where we don't have to think about the logic, but can we experience something? So let's take a really simple example right now, and I'm giving you this example based on an incident I had with someone, an adult, an adult who was afraid to express themselves for fear of being made fun of. Now, it's a very simple exercise where this person was in a room with me, and there were a bunch of people, and all I said was, okay, pick up any instrument you want from this room and play. Now you might think that's a very simple exercise, especially if you're confident about your music and you have some music skills, you might not hesitate doing something like this. But now think about somebody who's never touched an instrument before, who's never picked up a guitar before, and then I put a bunch of ukuleles and guitars or whatever, or a drum, and now this person is like, oh my god, I don't know how to play this, and you start thinking about what you don't know how to do, right? Even though I'm saying it does not matter, it still matters to you because of the definitions of what music is, and how you are not good enough because you don't know how to play that instrument. Now you're stuck in this. You see the limitation here. You can't express yourself now because of some ideas of what you think music is, or what you think people are going to laugh at, which means you think if I do that, they will laugh. You don't know yet, but you already think that if you do certain things in a certain way, you're going to be laughed at. So it's kind of a vague situation to be in. But since it's a music therapy workshop and music has to be kind of at some point explored, you are going to eventually find the courage to just do it because other people are doing it. Now, believe it or not, or like, I mean, you can have all the questions you want, but this person who I'm talking about now, who is an adult, decided, okay, I'm going to take that step. I'm going to play a tiny little choice to just play and express themselves through this instrument that they've never tried before, and suddenly found this liberation. It's like, okay, I'm going to play. So the first time he hits the drum, it's like, I'm going to play, and then let's see what happens. And nothing is going to happen because who's going to say anything to you? I mean, there's nobody here who's a bully who's going to be making fun of your music skills. And even if they did that, we'll handle it. But like, I mean, I'm not going to just sit down quietly if somebody is making fun of somebody in a room like that. But my point here is that he took the choice, and then the choice kind of does its own work. So if you take a choice whether in a room where everybody else is playing music, you're immediately accepted in that space. And that experience of contributing to a musical thing that's going on, where you're not being laughed at, you're not being judged. Not only that, you just did something that you've never done before and it feels great. So you can see how this can be very empowering, right? You've actually broken this huge thing that you've been struggling with, where you've never been able to express yourself out of the fear of being made fun of, which also stems from your idea of somebody who can be made fun of. You see yourself as somebody who can be made fun of, or who is not talented, or who is stupid, or who is not, whatever thoughts you're having. But in this one small little choice of expressing yourself through an instrument, you kind of throw all those things away. So suddenly it's like, this person is like, okay, I've done this for the first time, and it's great, and I just experienced something wonderful. I don't have any reason to doubt this process anymore. I can be myself. So that empowerment comes through something really tiny like that. So this is just a small little example, but like, you can go further into this by thinking about like a lot of mental health issues that, let's take for example trauma and abuse, and even like, let's say, anxiety or depression and suicidal thought, things like this, where at the core of it there is something very emotional that is actually driving this whole thing, right? Which means some kind of helplessness. So there's a way of understanding anxiety and or even the cause for like fear and anxiety, and how it kind of comes together, and where this trauma and how you start responding from that space. It's this combination of helplessness. So a negative situation, which could be like losing someone, it could be being in a car accident, it can also just be feeling sad or feeling uh, worthless, that helpless situation with a negative emotion or a negative connection to it. So when you can't do anything about it, there's a negative situation and you can't do anything about it. This combination will cause some kind of anxiety, or can also lead to trauma and all the other things. So if you think of that space, music can actually work in another way, which is typically if you're faced with some fear or some anxiety or some trauma when you're confronting that idea, the tendency of your mind is to focus entirely on that, on only on that aspect of it, right? And so you get so stuck with that, and you want to end that process, or you want it to stop, or you want this feeling to go away, or you want that emotion to stop, or you're trying to control it, or you want to do something so that it goes away, or looking for a solution. You're kind of focused only on that, but your mind is actually capable of doing a lot more. So this idea of rational thinking, so there's, I guess there is like the emotional reaction, then there is the rational reaction, then there's the intelligent or like the logical reaction. I'm not very sure of these terms right now because my mind is racing. But like what I mean is like getting into the rational space is very difficult when your emotions are taking over. But in a musical process like this, even though the trauma or the anxiety is right in front of you, or you're focusing on that, or it's right in your present moment, you still have the rest of your brain, right? And so through this music process, which music, well, let me give you some information here. There have been a lot of studies and a lot of experiments, and also like scans of people on music when listening to music, right? So typically, when you're doing something, when you're doing a certain task or performing a certain task, you're using that specific area of your brain which is related to that task, or uh, the functioning of that process, right? But what they've noticed when listening to music is the whole brain is functional at that time. It's not just the music parts of your brain or something like this, because music is actually affecting many things. It's kind of playing with your memory, it's playing with your, if you're a musician, then you're also thinking like from the logical space, you're kind of recognizing the notes, you're recognizing the harmonies, the melodies. Well, I don't know, thousands of things, many things are happening when you're listening to music. It's also you're thinking of the lyrics, and so multiple things are happening. And you can look for these scans online where the whole brain is like, it's, if you think of like a fire, it's like a firework happening there. There's a lot of activity happening in the brain. Just because of that, you will be functioning from a much more aware space. you know Things that not normally don't occur to you will occur to you because your brain is functioning at a higher level. So you can problem solve better. You might also be able to see the other aspects. You might have better perspective. You can be more observant of your thoughts and your emotions instead of getting stuck into it. It's like you're not going head on into it. You have a lot more perspective, and you have a lot more awareness. um, yeah, so this is how music ends up working, because there's a lot more that can happen through taking part in music by listening or by participating. um, I've also worked, I'm just going to get into other areas right now, so if anybody has any questions you can always ask. But there are other areas also where music works in terms of bringing back some kind of memory, in terms of when you're working with Alzheimer's and dementia and other aspects. You can bring back certain memories, which is not for the sake of doing some, like, it's not bringing back memories for like proving that you can bring back memories. This is more for like, again, empowerment. So what I believe is that when you're struggling with some form of dementia, you're also you're experiencing this idea of helplessness again. You can't remember, you don't know, you don't recognize. And fear, there's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of imagine not recognizing something. It's right there in front of you. There's also threat. Sometimes you also sense a lot of threat. So all these things can be very, like, limiting and emotionally very, how to say, kind of you kind of are secluded, by yourself, because of all these experiences or these things that are happening. And sometimes what you do through music interactions like this or music activity is that the process of playing music together itself is something that feels good. But in the process of um, these musical activities, you can also kind of try to bring back certain things, so, because there are memories rooted in music. So if you bring back, say, for example, if you discover their favorite song or you try to play their favorite song, uh, that will bring back certain memories, because that's how it is. Like, it's known that the associations with music and memory are quite strong. So you can bring back certain memories, and then if that person is able to remember that, it is empowering. And so you can see how they change, their attitudes change. They're a little bit, they're a lot more. Um, if you, I mean, for a lack of a better word, their attitudes are a lot more positive because of these experiences. Makes them feel better about themselves. They don't feel like so hopeless, or like they don't feel so afraid anymore. Or even if they're afraid, or even if they're slightly aggressive about something, there's a possibility of expressing that also, right? So then when that can be expressed, then you can understand that this person is feeling upset about something. Then you can figure out what it might be, and then maybe try to work on that so that it doesn't bother them anymore. So there are multiple ways of, like, working. It can also work in, I've worked with children who have cancer, and they themselves have said that on the day that they played music, which means they play for about an hour and a half, 2 hours sometimes, they just sit down there and they play. You don't need to tell them much. The moment they figure out that they can do this, a lot of these kids were just playing music, and they're like stage 4 cancer. They themselves have told me, in passing, that they sleep well on that night. Like Thursday nights, we sleep well, because it's like you indulge in this process of playing music and just so immersed in it. Pain is also managed in well, I think I didn't really do much research on this, but in these conversations during supervision, I think what they said was, it's the same neurotransmitter. Pain and music is kind of the same neurotransmitter. So, like, you don't, neither of them is, like, fully communicated. Like, your pain, or like, because you're enjoying this process of music and the transmitter is the same, then you kind of experience lesser pain because there's a lot of music happening. That's kind of like the scientific part of it, or whatever. It doesn't matter. Ultimately, the what matters is that they're saying they sleep well. So that's what counts. And also, coming back from hospital, having certain injuries and having been operated on, and you can imagine the pain. But, like, if you go to my website, you'll see this photograph of this guy sitting with bandages and playing a harmonium. He just came in from hospital. He just walked in from hospital. His knee is bleeding still with the blood there or whatever, because he was just bandaged. And he walks in, climbs up the steps, walks past, sees the harmonium, sits down straight away there and starts playing. That's the first thing he wants to do. And this is without being told anything. They just figure it out. They know that music can help their pain. Yeah, so I'm going to conclude here and tell you the main idea of music therapy is empowerment. It's like kind of using music in an experience through listening or participation. And since it's a communication, you're communicating and expressing yourselves, and then in a safe space, of course, and where there's no judgment. Uh, Again, how this is all, like, you can't really convince somebody that you're not judging them, but in this process of free playing, where nothing that they offer is looked at, or like you don't question anything that they're playing. Whatever they play or whatever they express musically is accepted. That creates this idea of non-judgment also, because they're being who they are and it's being accepted. In fact, you're actually using that and playing with them, so that creates this, like, really strong idea of acceptance. um, in all this, you're basically trying to address emotional needs or emotional complications that exist from childhood. You're also trying to create new ideas, new relationships between parents and children, between adults who can't get along. You can create new identities through this music process, because now it's not based in this language that I talk about in the beginning, right? These ideas of wrong and right and good and bad and whatever, all these things just go out the window. So you have the possibility of also creating new relationships for yourself and for others. Yeah, so basically, this is the way it works. Um, I'm ready to take questions now if anybody has any questions.
Um, yes, sir. So I have a question for you. So I wanted to know if music therapy is used all alone. What I mean is an individual subjected to music therapy alone, or side by side do we have do we inculcate other therapies? For example, dance therapy, because music and dance go together. So
Yeah.
will we be using both of it together, or is music therapy always practiced singularly?
No, it's not practiced singularly. It actually works well in complement. Is that the correct way to say it? Complementary. Yeah, so like along with something else. So if you're, even if it's not just movement therapy, it doesn't have to be art based or some kind of expressive therapy. It actually works best if something else is happening, and it's a good way of like working together in a team. It can also work individual, like you can also work with music therapy, only with music therapy, but it doesn't have to be like that. Actually, it helps you process a lot of other things that are happening. So sometimes if you're actually in some other form of therapy and you use music along with that, it is also a good way to bind everything together. So
All right.
traditional psycho, if you're, for example, if you're with a psychiatrist or with a psychologist, and you're processing many things, and it's all based in language and communication, right? In terms of language, because of your communication form. Now, a lot of that stuff that you understand, you can process it much better in through you using music, because you already know, you've already heard it, you've understood it. But now, how does that become part of your life? That can be a really interesting way to work.
Yes. Thank you for answering that question, sir. May I also ask you, um, for example, music in itself is more effective on certain individuals than others. So, say for example, a person with anxiety walks into your clinic, and so what will be the first step that you will take, and how will this go about? It'd be great if you could pick a disorder and tell us how music therapy works along those lines.
Yeah, sure. But what did you say in the beginning? What was your statement in the beginning? You said it only works with certain people. Is that what you said?
Yes, so I meant music is more effective to certain people. For example, a lot of them are more receptive of music, while some of them might not be that receptive. So, my another question was if music therapy works the best for people who are very receptive of music. And
The
I'm
thing
pretty
is,
sure that, mm, yeah.
no, it's not really like. I mean, I kind of like. I'm not entirely disagreeing with your point because I see what you're trying to say. But that's again, you're thinking about traditional music, right? If you think about expression, it there is no limit. Like I don't think it specifically works for certain people or not. It's for everyone, and because primarily we are musical beings. Every human being has music innate. Like its sound is one of our primary forms of communications, or that's the first way we understand certain things. For example, like um, when you ask me the next part of it, this idea of somebody having anxiety, I might use a simple technique like this technique called grounding, which is, I'm trying to see if I can play this. Can you hear this? You know, and right now it's a little bit fast, but I'll bring it down. Maybe that'll be the first thing. If I notice somebody has anxiety or is like highly anxious, the first thing I might want to do is to do something grounding, like like on a drum, which has some bass notes, like not like something trebly, but like something like this. Yeah, can you hear the sound?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so something like that, something which has a little bit more bass in it, and but with a steady pattern. Now, where is this coming from? This is not. This doesn't have to relate to only a certain kind of person. This is for everyone, right? And behind this idea is this notion of the calmness you can receive from here, like from maybe from when you were in your mother's womb, and you the kind of the calmness that you can receive from hearing her steady heartbeat. And if that heartbeat increases, you are going to get tense because you're like, hey, what's going on? Why is her heart racing? You know, it's the beat of her heart is increasing, and that creates chaos for you. It's like, hey, something is wrong. Something is wrong with her, or something is wrong in my environment. That is your first idea of calmness and not calmness. So if you take the principal idea of playing a drum, you can also say, okay, that's just a very calm drum beat. It's a very steady drum beat and it's slow, and then the pace makes me feel relaxed. So you might make it, you can make that a logical thing. But why does every human being react to that particular sound? Why does that mean calmness? In every culture and every human being that you play this to will definitely agree that there is some form of calmness in that. Why do we have this idea, this primitive idea, or this innate idea of the meanings of these sounds? Why does playing fast create some kind of stress or excitement? Why do we react like that? It's a universal reaction, right? So I hope I answered your question, especially about the
Yes.
anxiety part.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir. We have another question by Mariam. So she's asking, how can we use music therapy if you're not skilled in music?
Hmm. So the therapist will have to have some form of music training, but you're not relying on your musical skills. You're relying on what I just said, which is communication through music. So you will be relying on using sounds to communicate, which means what are you trying to accomplish? Like you said, somebody has anxiety. Music skill is not important in that point. You're trying to create this idea of calmness and security, right? It's safe, it's secure, you don't have to worry, nothing is going to go wrong here. Come, let's see what can happen. That's what you're trying to communicate. So you will use this idea of course, your musical skills in playing, because you will have to play it out nicely. But ultimately, you're not relying on your skills as much as the understanding of that sound for that person. Now, you will also be noticing things like their breathing patterns. So you might not necessarily want to start at some, if they're breathing heavy, sometimes it also helps to, before going into grounding, you can also try something like matching their breathing patterns in your playing. So subconsciously, I might observe their breathing patterns and play something on my guitar with, like, sorry, I'm not going to play that now. You might want to use that as your rhythmic structure, not by making it so obvious, but you ultimately that person is going to experience it because you're kind of basing it off their system, right? They're breathing in a certain way. You monitor that and then you play a tune, a melodic tune based on that rhythm that they have. So yeah, your skills are being used like that, not as much as like, hey, I can play like Mozart in C sharp minor. So therefore, it's not. I mean, that's not the way you're using your skills.
All right. Thank you, sir. I hope that answered Mariam's question. We have another question by Shreya. So she's asking if there is a particular music for a particular disorder.
Not at all. And that I totally. Oh, be careful of that. I mean, if that question is coming from some kind of curiosity, then great question. So good you asked that question because I wouldn't have remembered to do this. This is a dangerous area. A lot of people claim or even think of music therapy like that is some kind of prescription. There is no such thing. I know a lot of traditional forms of music therapy. I'm not going to go there and like name people or whatever, but like this idea of um, hey, this one will work for this and this thing will create this. This idea does not work because everybody is different. Every human being is different. There is no prescription like that. So what you consider to be calming may not be so calming for me. It might actually be disturbing for me. Like this person I know, a friend of mine recently had this conversation with me because of there's all kinds of things on YouTube and uh, by whatever some God knows what all is there. But then there was something for calming or some relaxation or something like that. She put it on because she thought it'll help. And then what happened is, even though this music was created by somebody for calming, what she experienced was something terrible. Her brain, something exploded in her brain, and there was blood all over her brain and things like this. So that was a traumatic experience. So what I'm trying to say here is that unless you're under some kind of supervision or like there's somebody professional there to monitor that process, it's not safe to just think that just because it was composed or like there's a claim of it being calming doesn't mean it will cause calmness to you. In many of my listening sessions with clients, I've made some mistakes because like in my need to provide for them and having a session where it went well, thinking that it'll help them, I've told them to go back home and listen to this if it troubles them because it worked. And that same piece of music, which worked when I was with them, which given them some form of relaxation or calmness, created the opposite when they were alone. So I quickly, like, I was watching over this because I asked them to call me back immediately if anything happens. So they called and they said, I don't know what happened, but that same piece I played and it's disturbing me right now. So you can't really do that. There is no form of it. One size doesn't fit all, and secondly, that same size that fits you may not fit you 2 minutes later.
All right. Thank you, sir. There's another question by Mariam, which I guess will go good as a follow-up question. She's asked if there are certain group of chords, major and minor, and specific beats that are used for certain mental issues.
Yeah, kind of asking the same question actually. Yes, certain beats can mean certain things, but it's the response you're looking for. And if the person is not responding the way you think they're like with your whatever goal you had, then you have to change because it depends on how they understand that, right? So I might think that playing E minor and C together or something might be beautiful because I like the C and E minor or whatever it might be. But if I'm playing that and you can see there's still the breathing has not changed for the last 10 minutes, then there's no point in pursuing this major or minor or whatever. You know that whether it's major, minor, or whatever it might be, it's not working. So what do I do now? Like, are they responding or not? So yes, all these things are helpful to give you some kind of guidance, but these are very generalized ideas of things, right? It's like, okay, major and minor combination creates this majority. Most of the time it creates that. So out of 10 people, maybe 9 people will say, yes, it was very melodic or it made me feel the certain way. But that does not mean anything. Ultimately, when you're having an intervention with someone, you want to see whether they are reacting to that or not.
All right. Thank you again, sir. We have another question by Janvi. She's asked, does music therapy benefit individuals physically?
Can you be a little bit more specific?
Probably she meant physically, as in maybe you feel much more better.
Yeah, of
Uh,
course. Yes, yes. Definitely.
mm,
So those are the therapeutic benefits. So there's the therapy side of it. There's also the therapeutic side of it, right? So feeling energetic, feeling love or whatever, you listen to music, you feel love or something, or you listen to a love song and you feel suddenly romantically, whatever. So these kind of things are general, right? It's like it can make you listen to some heavy metal. Your anger might feel like quenched, or like I don't know. There are many examples like this. So music will make you feel certain things in a therapeutic way, or even on the surface you might experience certain emotions. Or, well, let me take that question into another space just to give some information. Music therapy is very effective in physical things. For example, in physiotherapy, you might want them to do something like, like, let's say, raise their hands like that, and that might be something very difficult for that person to do because it's just about this. But if you have, like, say, you put a tambourine up there and you say reach for the tambourine and hit it, like, that way it becomes more about the tambourine than about putting your hand up. So a lot of times I do this with some of my students who, like, I mean, if I'm, even there's also a department in Delhi that kind of focused on this, where they were using music in physiotherapy for adults. Also, for example, walk from here to there, take 10 steps, which is very difficult for some people. There's a way of doing this where you stand with them, hold your guitar, stand with them, and walk with them and sing some song that they like. Suddenly, it's no longer about walking 10 steps. It's about, it's about this musical thing that you're doing with them. So your brain forgets about the activity and you're more indulged in the music that's happening at that time. So yeah, you can use it like this manipulation, but good manipulation.
all right. Thank you, sir. There's another question by Divya. So she's asked, so what exactly is the science behind music helping us to maintain sound mental health?
What is the science behind music? What?
I think she meant what exactly is the science when we say music is related to your mental health and it'll help you have a healthy well-being mentally.
Hmm. It helps you process things better. That ability to process things better and to have perspective will contribute to your mental health in a positive way. You understand what I mean? So the more perspective you can have about yourself or your surrounding, uh, will improve your mental health in many ways. I think that's what it is. I don't know whether I'm answering exactly what you're asking, but I mean, it's not a very specific question you're asking, so I hope it helps.
Yes. Suzanne has asked if music therapy and music relaxation are the same thing.
Not really. Relaxation is part of this. It's one of the therapeutic benefits of music, right? Like we said, it can help you feel excited, it can help you feel calm, it can help you relax. These are well known relaxation. It can help you feel very emotional. You might start crying or whatever. These are all like the general emotional reactions toward music, and also the therapeutic benefits like relaxation. It's one of the things. uh, in music therapy, in a clinical way, you're going beyond that. It's not just about helping somebody relax. It's also about figuring out things, like going deeper, understanding, which is what I talked about just now in terms of like perspective and having a wider perspective, having more awareness, being able to understand what's going on, and like that self reflection, which is what therapy is about.
Uh, Thank you, sir. Michelle has another question. So she's asked you if you have encountered any individuals for whom music therapy was not at all effective.
No, there's no such thing, I think. Somehow or the other, indirectly, directly, sometimes it works with people you're not even working with. So people who are on the peripheral of, like, you're working with their children, and you can see it's affecting them, and it's making them think about things. So it's like it's impossible for music not to work.
All right. Thank you, sir. We have another question from Roshan Pinto. So he's asked you if does culture influence what type of instruments to use for therapy? Like South Indians would prefer Carnatic and some from the West prefer Western instruments. So how does culture play a role?
In the instrument part of it, it really doesn't make any difference. It's about your preference. So I'll have a bunch of instruments, and if you're using anything, whatever catches your fancy, you're going to pick up, which includes not just like whether Western or Indian, or there's no such thing. It's like all instruments are there, and I mean, I use harmoniums a lot. More importantly, it's about what you're trying to achieve. So whether it's sitar or a guitar or a harmonium or like I don't know, a flute, it's what you're trying to do through that. So it doesn't make any difference. The preference is obviously there, but ultimately when you get into the process, it will become more about what you're experiencing than what the instrument is. You won't be thinking much about, oh, I'm from America and therefore I'm not going to play the harmonium, or like I'm Indian and I'm from Karnataka, so I will only play the. These thoughts will not occur to you. Initially, yes, I think some people might have some hang-ups or whatever, but a lot of times what we notice is there will be this idea of, no, it's an instrument, so don't step on it or don't throw it. These are the kind of things I encounter a lot, and my primary thing is like it doesn't matter. Like step on it, throw it, break it. As long as they're safe, it's fine, because this is not about the sacredness of music. It's about using music. So yeah, I think in the school that I was studying in Delhi, the college, they had like a veena in the room, and a lot of the times parents would be like, "No, sacred instrument," and don't. And we're like, "No, it doesn't matter. Step on it or whatever. If as long as the child is able to express themselves and find that safety, which can also mean sometimes when they're testing can also mean like throwing things around. These instruments that I have, like I can show you like something. Well, these are okay right now, but most of them have been flung. They've been flung in the room from one corner to the other. I've broken my xylophone like what? I've repaired it 3 times. The xylophone was just shattered because and these ukuleles. There's a child who takes these ukuleles and throw them in the room, and then goes and stands over the instruments and starts, scolding the instruments. He's playing out something. Now, if I restrict him from doing that, I'm not going to understand him, or like he's not going to be able to show me all these things. This is still an expression, you know. These ukuleles or the xylophone have become his way of showing what he's going through in his life, being power over, you know. There's no empowerment. It seems like somebody is controlling him like that, and he's playing it out. So the instrument no longer about playing. He's expressing himself in another way.
All right. Thank you, sir. We have another question by Divya. She's asked, will hormonal imbalance be aided by music therapy, especially for girls?
It can help, yes, of course. Because if it's an emotional thing, and if it's about like, see, music helps you also. There's a lot of chemicals that get released during the process of listening to music. You'll know this. Like, what are the words? Serotonin, dopamine. What are the? There are many things like this. But it ultimately, I kind of my point here is that whether it is some kind of chemical balancing or emotional balancing or emotional experience, all this is possible through music, because music is primarily like based on emotions, and playing music will also contribute to this idea of feeling good, right? Which means whatever the chemical process of that is will also take place. Well, I'm being kind of vague with that because I don't really kind of familiarize myself with these things. I know, like, yeah, serotonin, dopamine, whatever. I know these things, but I'm not really focused on that. It's more about the experience. So I mean, that stuff happens. Whatever that biological thing is, it takes place. So to answer her question, yeah, it will help.
All right. So probably this will be the last question that we'll be taking this afternoon. So Jennifer has asked if music is why is music effective in influencing our moods? I've heard that music triggers the release of certain neurochemicals that affect and change our mood. Is this the principle you base your therapy on?
Yes, primarily for the therapeutic benefits on more like the surface level, you're relying on that process because that's what happens in the playing of music. I was just talking to you about all these chemicals and these neurotransmitters or whatever. Like I'm not even familiar with those. I mean, I know these things, but my brain doesn't work like that. You know, like this slightly scientific section of like names and the chemicals and the neurotransmitters and things like that. I don't remember things like that. All I know is that process takes place. So while playing music, something happens. The brain releases these neurotransmitters and or whatever, and that process happens. Relying on that to a certain degree, but as clinical music therapy would, I mean, from that space, you're kind of going beyond that also. It's more about like you know beyond like the feeling part of it. It's also the experience. So creating new experiences, having better perspective, being able to process better, or like to have the ability to observe, you know, like and accept, to deal with your fears. Fear exists, or like some trauma exists. How do you deal with that? The feeling part of it is not going to help there. You need to be functioning at a higher level, you know. So that processing and being observant, being able to regulate yourself, keeping your emotions aside, understanding that this is just an emotion and it's going to go, all this stuff requires a lot more. And you can also do, what we're trying to focusing through music therapy in a clinical space is that stuff.
All right. So I did say that that was the last question, but then let us take just one more.
Doesn't
This seems
matter.
quite interesting.
Well, there's
If
still time, right? So till
any more
4 I'm
questions.
okay with anything, and even if you want to go a little further, it's fine.
No, so we'll try and wind it up in a few minutes.
Okay,
Let's see how this goes. Yeah.
okay.
Just one last question. So Amrita has asked, how can we be more receptive towards music?
Why would you not be receptive towards music? Well, what's stopping you, Amrita? I don't know. It depends on that. I'll have to meet you and, and see what happens.
Um, yes.
We could probably take another two questions and then we can probably wind up. Yeah.
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah. Um, all right. Maria has asked,
One
has
second, sorry,
someone...
sorry. Shishma, one second, okay? I'm just going to go back to that. I kind of made a joke about it, but it's not, I don't mean to make a joke about that, Amrita, wherever you are. It's not like, so if the restriction, is it like some cultural restriction or is it your experience with music? So did you have a bad experience with music and therefore you're restricted to the idea? Or is it a cultural thing where music is not welcome? So these, it can be discussed in the sense if you understand what is, I need to understand a little bit better what is causing the restriction. If it's an experience that was negative, and you need to work your way around it, then yeah, it like you'll have to give it one more chance, I think, because it's worth it. It might be in a, like I told you, this friend and this person I know had this terrible experience where something exploded in her brain. Now that's very hard to recover from, but that's a mistake, and we can do something about it.
All right. Thank you, sir. We have a question from Judah. So he's asked us, will having a technical ear affect the way you work with a client?
Will
I
having a
mean,
technical
I think he probably meant having certain disabilities with how your ear functions. In
Hmm.
that case, will the way music therapy work differ?
Not really, because you can also change it around, and if you know that that person can't hear well, then you might rely more on the on the touching part of it. So, for example, you can ask them to hold like here while you play here, so you can have more sensory based things. So you can keep something on their chest and play. You can. So I have a drum which is a big one. Maybe something like that. You can ask them to put their hands on it while you play, so it can become more like an experiential thing. So you might not hear it, but you can experience that rhythm because I'm playing it, or maybe place it on your chest and play it, so then you can feel it. You can have the same experience through that.
All right. So we have another person asking us, how do you know what is right fit for each person? Is it done by trial and error?
To a certain degree, yes. You're taking, so the more you work, you are more in tune with your client or the person you're working with, right? So the clues you take or the cues that you take could be like a verbal cue from their voice or something. So you can't go wrong with that. From the way they're speaking, or from the way, like I told you, the breathing pattern or a certain habit that they have. Maybe they're like tapping their foot, and so you can use that. So it doesn't have to be always, something melodic. You don't have to only rely on melody and things like this. Sometimes it's about building that connection, which means taking something that you are doing already and using that, so that you can't go wrong with that.
All right, so probably this, I guess, would be our last question. It's from Divya again. So
Yeah.
she's asked, are there any particular courses which can help us pursue music therapy?
Yeah, there are many. I think I'm sure there are lots online. The place I went and studied in Delhi, I don't know whether they're still accepting students, but they used to have like a program. I mean, now with all this COVID-19, I don't know how what's going to happen, but like, um, well, stay in touch. I'm planning to start a small short course on music therapy, and at least the basic skills, or like the fundamental ideas behind music therapy. So I'll keep you guys posted on that.
All right. Thank you so much, sir. We're sure a lot of us are looking out for that.
Mm.
Um, and I guess now I will give it over to Kevin. Kevin?
Yes, yeah. So we've come to the end of the session today, and first of all, I want to thank you, Kamal sir, for making it here for this
No
awesome,
problem.
insightful session. And yeah, thank you. We thank you from the principal, the management, and the department, and the associations also. Special thanks to our teacher coordinators and the participants who are here. We have psychologists, we have school counselors, we have students all over. So it was amazing to have all of you. And yeah, thank you and have a good day.
Thanks, Kevin.
All right. Thank you so much, guys, for attending and being a part of this webinar. The feedback forms will be sent on your WhatsApp group. So kindly fill the form by today if you're willing to receive your certificate. All right. We hope you had a insightful session just as the WMA and Sumana had. Have a good day, guys.